In this video, I'm going to show you how I measured the sag on my XR650L on my own and why it is important. Hi, I'm Francois from AdventureBikeTruc.com. Now, some of you mentioned or suggested that I measure and set the sag on the rear suspension of my Honda XR650L. That's after I complained that the bike is a bit much for me sometimes in the dirt. It's also quite high. Now, I actually never really considered sag. I've heard of it. So I did some research and I found that it's actually something that's quite important. So I was interested to find what the sag is on my bike. And in most videos, there are at least two people and sometimes three, so one to hold the bike. And I didn't have anyone to ask, so I wanted to find a way to do it on my own. So I'm going to show you how I measured the sag on my XR650L, and then later we'll chat about why it's important. Now, the main thing for me wasn't to get it up to the millimeter. Now, I just wanted to make sure that it's not too far out, so I'm sure there are ways to get it much more accurate. But I just wanted to know, is it if it's like 2 inches out or 1 inch out. If it's a couple of millimeters, then I'm quite happy. Before we go over the process, let's very quickly chat about sag. There's two types. There's static sag and race sag. So static sag is just the amount of suspension sag with the bike's own weight on the suspension. So if you lift the back wheel, the wheel's going to drop out. If you just put the bike on its wheels, that's static sag, that little bit of drop. And then race sag is with the rider, foot on the foot pegs, hands on the handlebars with full gear and luggage. Whatever you have on your bike when you ride, the amount of suspension movement down from wheel fully dropped out, that is your race sag. And most sources state that should be around 30% of the total suspension travel of the bike. So the first thing that you need is your bike's rear suspension travel. Now I know from Honda's website, the XR650L has 280 millimeters of rear suspension travel. So 30% of that is 84 millimeters. I hope I did my maths right. Anyway, so 84 millimeters is the amount of sag that I want from a wheel fully extended or dropped out. So if the bike is on a center stand, or if you lift the bike on the side stand with the wheel dropping out, from that, with the full weight of me with my gear, it should drop about 84 millimeters. Then I know my race sag is right. Static sag, I don't know why you would want to know that. Maybe something with the spring rate, whether you have the right spring on there. Please, in the comments, let me know why it's important to even consider static sag. I mean, what should you do and what should it be? I don't know. Race sag feels like the important one when you ride. We'll chat at the end of the video why that is important and what that does to the handling of the bike. If you have more than one person, you can measure the distance from the axle, center of the axle, to some reference point on the bike, on the frame of the bike. Measure that distance and then put your weight on the bike and then measure that distance again, and then the difference is your race sag, the amount of sag on the bike. Now, for that you need a separate person, because someone needs to measure while you're on the bike, and especially the tall XR650L, there's no way you're going to measure back there while sitting on the bike. So what I did was I took this plastic tube, any firm piece of plastic or metal or wood, and this is from a car antenna, the sheath that the antenna goes in, and I marked notches here, 10 millimeter increments. So I could go more accurate with millimeters, but yeah, with the Koki pen, I marked 10. So I just wanted to know, am I more or less around the 80-85 millimeter mark? Then I'm happy, because then it's between 28 and 30% sag. So I marked that, and then I stuck the tube behind the indicator stalk. It's quite firm there, so it won't move. That's the fixed point on the frame. And then I bottomed it. The bottom of this was pressed against the axle nut, so that's my reference point. And it's also zeroed out now, so the bottom of the stalk is at the axle nut, and now if I sit on the bike, this thing will drop down and I can measure the amount of sag. So it's and then the nice thing is, because I'm recording this, I can check on the camera and see what the sag is, because there's no way to look. The other option was to somehow with the pen make a mark and then measure the distance. And that's what I initially did. So this worked much better, and then on the video I can watch with you what my sag is. Now I know ideally, well, you should have your full kit on, your helmet on your head, your backpack on your back, your tool kit, whatever you take with you when you ride, your boots, and then put your feet on the pegs, hands on the handlebars. So I did briefly do that. You can see the stalk or the measurement is jumping up and down slightly there at the end. That is when I lift up my feet just to that last bit of weight on the bike. So ideally you have to have all your weight on. I measured my sag. It was right about the 80mm mark, the 8th notch. It should be 84mm, so I'm sure if I put on my full kit it will drop a little bit more. I'm not too worried if it goes over 84, so say 90mm. I will do this more accurately at some stage, but I just wanted to know, am I very far out? If I was at 40mm, I would have set the sag to have more sag. If it was at 120, I would have reduced it by adding some preload. But I'm happy at more or less around the 84mm mark. So if you do it properly, if you want to do this properly, remember to have your full gear on, full weight on the bike, and then have someone hold the bike while you lift your feet up and sit in a neutral position. Oh, and before I forget, if you want to support this channel, you can check out the link below on the screen, the Buy Me a Coffee account, where you can buy me a gallon of gas for the bike. Thank you for the guys who have contributed so far. I really appreciate it. Okay, so now let's chat about why race sag is important. And this is something I never even considered. I mean, if the suspension works, it works, and it's supposed to soak up bumps. But the suspension is also there to keep your wheel on the ground in order to have as much traction as possible. And you can feel this if you go over ruts or corrugated roads. Sometimes you lose a bit of power, and that's because the wheel bounces around. Now, if you don't have any sag at all, that means the wheel is like fully extended. It's nice if you jump because there's more of the suspension to take up or to soak up that landing. But if your wheel is all the way down, it's already fully extended, the shock is fully extended. If there's a little bit of a rut or a hole in the ground and your wheel goes over that, there's no suspension travel left to drop the wheel into that hole or into that rut. And that will unsettle the bike. You want, and that's why 30%, so if you have, say, this much full suspension travel, and now you add the sag with your full weight on the bike, that's the race sag. Now if you go over ruts and stuff, your wheel can still drop that extra 30%. So I will have on this bike at least 80 to 85mm of wheel drop into ruts and stuff to keep the wheel on the ground. Now remember, the spring will push the wheel down away from the frame of the bike to maintain contact with the surface and therefore traction. So when would you want more sag? So say you do a lot of fast riding over uneven surfaces or desert racing where you want a comfortable ride, then more sag will help. You're not going to jump and you don't need accurate cornering. You're just going to ride it out. So I actually that's more how I ride. So I would actually like to have a little bit more sag because that means there's more suspension travel downwards as well, so away from the frame. And because I'm not going to jump and land, I don't need all the 70% of suspension travel to soak up the landing. So when would you want less sag? That's more for, say, motocross track where you do big jumps and you want more suspension travel to soak up that landings, and you want more accurate feel in the rear to steer the bike more accurately. So I sometimes ride like that, but not much. I'm still an amateur when it comes to those type of things. But I did recently try to jump the bike, and I got some air time, which will feature on the channel later. I didn't film it back then. I didn't expect it to happen. So I think for now I'm going to leave the sag at the recommended 30%. Okay, so now how do we set the sag? So let's say I had too much sag. The bike drops too much with my weight on it. So I want to take out some of that sag. I want to move the suspension further away from the chassis, from the frame. Well, and regardless of what you want to do, you first need to loosen the lock ring. So there's 2 rings on the suspension on the XR650L. There's not a lot of space in here, but you can get in there with a screwdriver and a hammer. You do get proper tools, but that is how a lot of people do it. So you first loosen the lock ring. That's the top of the 2 rings with little notches on it. You will hit it anti-clockwise to loosen the first lock ring. And then, so let's say we want less sag. So we need to add more preload. So you will turn in the adjusting ring. So that means clockwise. And that will move the point on which the spring rests down, which will lift up the bike. So that will reduce the sag. If you want to add sag, you do it the opposite way around. So you will turn the adjusting ring anti-clockwise. And that will move the point where the spring sits higher up, therefore less preload, so the bike will sag more when you sit on it. And then you just tighten the lock ring again snugly against it so that it can't adjust itself. So that's how you set it. There's lots of videos on how to set it. There's probably lots of videos explaining the whole sag process more, but this is how I set or measured my sag on my own on my Honda XR650L. If you have any questions or any advice, if I missed something, please comment below and then let me know what you want to see next. You want to see me jump the XR650L, or do you want me to see go up a hill and then stop right before the top and try to get it down again? Because I did it the other day and it was quite a mission, and I'm happy to film that. See you next time.